verses 11 and 12. And after him was Shammah, the son of Agi, and a Herodite. And the Philistines were gathered together into a troop, and where was a place of ground full of lentils. And the people fled from the Philistines. But he stood in the midst of the ground and defended it, and slew the Philistines, and the Lord wrought a great victory. Move on, Jeremiah 29:11-14. It says, For I know the thoughts that I think toward you, saith the Lord, thoughts of peace and not of evil, to give you an expected end. Then shall ye call upon me, and ye shall go and pray unto me, and I will hearken unto you. And ye shall seek me and find me, where ye shall search for me with all your heart. And I will be found of you, saith the Lord, and I will turn away your captivity, and will gather you from all nations and from the places whither I have driven you, saith the Lord. And I will bring you again unto the place where I caused you to be carried away captive. 1 Peter 5 verses 8 through 9. We should know this one very well. I know a lot of people have. It's been preached on for years. It says, Be sober and vigilant, because your adversary the devil, as a roaring lion, walketh about seeking whom he may devour, whom resist steadfast in the faith, knowing that the same afflictions and accomplishment in your brethren that are in the world. If you would please reach your hand this way, I'd greatly appreciate it. You can be seated. To do a little bit of a preface to the Philistines and Shammah, he was in the middle of a lentil field. The lentils are another name for beans. But the Philistines were actually a nation, but they were kind of people who didn't like to do the work. They like just come in, steal everything there was, and they like to pillage. They were kind of like the preface to Vikings. Most of us heard about Vikings, how they used to pillage Great Britain and the Roman Empire, and they used to pillage. Philistines were about the same way. They didn't really like to do the work. They just came in, took what they could, and they left. A lot of times they took people as slaves. But also the Philistines were a known enemy of the Israelites. When you read here about David's mighty men were kind of his generals, his head people who he went to. Almost his secret service. But these people were ones who you can read all throughout 2 Samuel. There's multiple places who talks about David's mighty men. But none like Shammah. Shammah was one who he went down to a pit in the middle of winter and defeated a lion in the middle of a pit. But he was one who was almost like a Peter. He was willing to stand up and almost go head-to-head with everything there was. He was also the one who led the troop to go get a glass of water for David when he was tired and thirsty. He was one who was hot-headed. He liked to just go in and get it. But at the same time, with this being said, our Christian life today is a lot like the bean field. We can look at the bean field here and we look at everything going on and how the devil likes to just make almost our life seem almost the value of a bean field. You're going to look at bean fields today, you look at one little tiny bean, it ain't worth much. But you take a field, you take everything in value in that field and you take it all together, there's a value behind it. Growing up in Indiana, we are very educated in the prices of corn because we are a corn state. Everything that we do through high school, a lot of our math we do, they always base it off of corn. Corn or pigs, because we are a corn state and we're a pig state. Everything else we have to get in our stores is brought in by truck. We are producing everything else but everything. We have textiles, we can do everything we need to. But at the same time, if you've ever ran through a cornfield, you know you can get cut up pretty bad through a cornfield. But the value of just one corn stalk isn't very much. But we look at the value of all together and the prices together, it makes up a value. That's how farmers are able to afford what they do. But at the same time, being a farmer, you never make much money. You pretty much make enough to survive. But we look at our lives, and we look at our Christian life and how we should be towards God. The devil want nothing more than take what we have in our life and compare it to just a single beanstalk. They're saying everything you have in your life, everything that you are, is nothing of value. The devil wants to take possession of everything you own. He wants to take possession of your life. your children, your husband, your wife, your kids. He wants to take everything there is and take it nothing of value to you. Deface everything. You can take $1 bill in the United States and you can take a mark right across it with a pen. You have just defaced it. That is able to be punished by prison for defacing value. You see people who they make little notes on their dollar bill. That is defacing value of American currency. That is punishable by prison. You look at everything else there is. I see people who have taken quarters and they've drilled holes in to make a necklace because it's their first one they've ever owned. That was a long time ago when I was younger. A lot of people would do that. It was a very popular thing to do in school. But at the same time, with that being said, it was defacing American currency to make it worthless. Do we still take the dollar bill who's been wrote on and marked all over it? Yes, because it's still a dollar bill to us. But in all honesty, once the American Treasury sees that back in value, they have to take it. It can no longer be in circulation. But that is the problem with defacing American currency. It belittles how much we have in the country. Yes, you can say we can always print more. We can always get more from the factory. We can always get more from wherever they mint these things at. But at the same time, we can only mint so much before we get into inflation like we are in today. When it comes to inflation, we get things as gas prices raising up. I read something the other day. We look at Iran and Iraq, who the American dollar for gas, you pay 39 cents for a gallon. But yet we look all across the nation of America, it's $3, $4 a gallon. I remember when I was just learning how to drive at 16 years old, the price of gas was almost $6 in Indiana. It was almost $6 a gallon. So in order to stop having to pay that, I rode the school bus. I didn't want to drive my truck. I didn't want to drive to school because I wanted to save my money I had. But at the same time, with that being said, the prices of things of inflation have went up. You look at how the devil wants to take your life and everything he wants to put towards you and take everything that you are, he wants to inflate it and make it almost too impossible. We can look at how the devil wants to take things in our lives. He can come up to our young people especially and say, you're never going to be anything of value when you get older. Look at your brothers. Look at your sisters. They've never made anything special. How are you going to be anything different? The devil likes to inflate things and make us think we're not worth what we really are. We look at everything in our lives and we look at how our lives are just pitiful sometimes. American people, we are a very wealthy nation, but yet we like to have the woe is me attitude. We like to take the things of saying, oh, well, this has happened, almost play the victim about things. But at the same time, we are ones who, if we would truly know the value of what we are worth, we wouldn't put up with half what we put up with. We look at the Christian people and how many times we face things, that we go through things, and we just say, oh, well, it's just life. We look at things in our lives and we say, oh, well, it's not God's will. When in reality, if we would look truly in and pray about God's will, what God would really want us to have, it'd be more than what we're stationed with. We look at things in the military. DJ will know this well, that a military unit can only stay out in the field for so long. You're trained to be able to survive off the land. You're able to be forged and get things that you want. But at the same time, a military unit is only truly able to stay flourish for so long out in the field. If they're not with that, if they don't have constant reinforcements, constantly renewal of supplies, eventually they will go dry. We look at the Benghazi situation we had back when Obama was in office, and the troops that were over there, they could only stand for so long because they only had a limited amount of supplies and munitions. But yet we look at other things in life. We look at Roman history on how they would do these great battles and they do these great campaigns of conflict, and everything they would go through, they still had to have a basis of income. A lot of times the soldiers there, yes, there was such a thing as a pride of the Roman Empire. But at the same time, if they were not paid, because a lot of them were paid soldiers, if they were not paid, if they were not given what they were due, what they had earned, a lot of them would try to leave. That was punishable by death. But yet we look at everything in our lives and how the devil wants to take everything we are and take it and say, yeah, I'll give you this, I'll give you that. I promise you a better payday in the end. I promise you a better pay on this situation. I promise you'll have more fun. But at the same time, we look at everything in our lives. We take everything we see that God has given us so far, and we compare it to a bean field. Young people, we can sit there every single day, and we can say, yes, everything we have, everything we're going to do, that this is what I plan to do for God. But all it takes is one little slip up, and everything's over to us. We can look at everything in our lives, and we look at how the Philistines would come in and they would pillage and take things. A lot of times when they came through an area, they would also poison the wells. They would take a dead animal or a dead human, even dead human being of that civilization, throw it into the well to poison it, and therefore poisoning the water supply. That was a well-known thing throughout history from Native Americans to other countries other countries throughout the world, that they would do that to poison the water supply. I've said it before, you control the faith, you control the food, you control the water, you control the people. But at the same time, the devil still likes to do the same thing. If he can control where we get our help from, if he can control your mindset of it, he then controls you. We look at everything through our lives, and we look at Jeremiah 29, verses 11. We look at everything else. That way he says, "For I know the thoughts that I think toward you, saith the Lord, thoughts of peace, not of evil, and to give you an expected end." We can look at everything throughout that. We think sometimes we like to have this attitude, the woe is me, and we like to say, well, God's just out to get me. He doesn't want me. I have been there myself multiple times throughout this past few months where I've asked Honor multiple times, it seems like I can't get ahead. It seems like everything I do, I take 2 steps forward and I get the rug yanked out from underneath them and I fall 4 steps back. And I'm constantly falling back down the hill. And I sat there and I began to go in my office in the mornings, and I get there, I go in, I get there at 7, but most times our guy who puts out the tickets and dishes them out to everybody who's supposed to be in their zone doesn't get there till 8. So I have a free hour to do what I want. So I began to sit there. I would go into my office. I would lock myself in there, and I would start playing the music I would like to listen to. And I began to pray and read my Bible in my office. And I began to sit there and be able to think and meditate on God. And as the things would go through my life, and I would start to think about that and say, why does it always seem like me who is always one falling back down that hill? And I remember God talking to me saying, you think that's how I really am, but yet you overlooked everything I've given you in your life. It's easy for us to come into the attitude of saying, woe is me. It's saying my life is worthless. I would have been better off dead. I would have been better off if I would just given up a long time ago. It's easy to say that with our attitude of what we have. It's easy to come up with the attitude of saying, God hates me or God doesn't truly love me. If he did, he would have let this happen. At the same time, we can have a same attitude of realizing it's just the devil trying to talk to us and sway us. Again, if you control the faith, if you control the people, and you control the water. Water in the Bible is known as the Spirit of God. If you control the Spirit of God in someone's life, and you make them feel like they're so worthless that God can't move on them, you then control them spiritually. We look at everything in our lives, we take everything that we meant, everything we should be, and everything we can be, and we say, God wants this for my life. He doesn't want you to just be a pew warmer. He just doesn't want us to come in Sunday and Wednesday and sit on a pew and sit there with our arms crossed. How many times have we seen churches fall by the wayside? During this whole COVID epidemic, how many churches have closed their doors because too many people have came in and sat there, or they haven't came in because they're scared of COVID? Yes, I get it. COVID was real. COVID happened. It wasn't great. Nobody liked it. But at the same time, we're now coming out of that stage. We look at the numbers today. We look at how things have almost cut in three quarters of what they were at one point. I think last week I read that we're down to 3% infection rate now. But yet we still have people who choose to stay out of the church house because of COVID, and they use it as an excuse. But at the same time, when things come down to that fact of it, and the devil sits there in their heart, well, if you go to church, you might get infected. If you go to church, this might happen. You go to church, that might happen. But at the same time, we have young people who sit there and they watch how parents pull them out of the church house out of fear of something. But yet we sit there and we look at even as the adults how we think, well, I might get my kids sick. What if that happens? What happens if you don't get them in church? And we think of this and we look how the older people and the older generations, and I'm not throwing blame, I'm not throwing shade on anybody else or saying this is your fault. But at the same time, I look at these generations, my generation in particular, how we are having kids to these days, a generation of my life, on how many times they're saying church is not important. And again, they're staying out of church. Out of the in my youth group that I grew up with, we had 36 young people. At one time, we had 36 people. Out of those 36 kids in the youth group I had, 2 of us are in church. Because the parents then decided that it wasn't worth putting them in the church and making it of value. They traded the value of the bean field for they traded the value of the world on what they wanted to do. But at the same time, young people and the older people in the congregation, if we were to sit there and be like Shammah, we read how he said he planted his feet. He stood there. When you're getting ready for a fight, you just don't get limp. You lock your core in, you sit there and you plant your feet in, you get ready for that brace of impact. I remember when I was a younger person, I was playing soccer with my buddy Mav. All the young people were outside playing soccer. We had nothing better to do. We were in the town, so we couldn't play baseball like we wanted to, so we had to play soccer and kickball. So we were sitting there, we're playing around, and I was running for the ball, and all of a sudden Mav just stepped in front of me, and he planted. I'm running full speed. Again, that time I was 4'2". Mav is 6'2", 380 pounds. I bounced off of him like a bouncy ball off a rock wall, and I was on the ground. At the same time, when I came back to, he's like, "Are you okay?" No. I felt like I had ran into a concrete wall because he was planted. If he would have just been lollygagging or been over the side loosey-goosey about it, and I would have ran into him, no doubt I probably could have stumbled him up a little bit. But at the same time, because he had planted himself in and I wasn't expecting that, I bounced off of him. But yet, at the same time, when the devil comes at us, we feel like we shouldn't be this way. We feel like as a young people, or as a church in general, I know churches who say we should be peaceable. We should be complacent. We should be helping people. Yes, I agree with what we're saying. But at the same time, we have a value of our lives, and we say, well, we don't want to offend. The name of Christ offends. It should be offensive in the name of Christ. If we don't offend them through the name of Christ, what are we doing with the name of Christ? When I had backslid from God, I didn't dare say I was a Christian out of the fear of making a mockery of God. But yet we have a nation who lives in wickedness like we live in now, who still claims to be a Christian nation. We are ones who, when we stand up, we're too busy trying to love everybody instead of trying to show them what the altar really means. If we would truly love the world and what we were and what we are, we would then, in fact, point them to the cross, offensive or not. To the church, I'm not throwing attitude. I'm not trying to make people feel uncomfortable or upset by what I'm saying. I'm trying to encourage people. But at the same time, with the bean field, we say it's just a little of value, but yet we are so far back from what Shammah was. As we need to be like Shammah and be able to stand up and say, what I have is of value. I'm not, somebody else can run away no matter what happens. I'm still going to stand for God in my life. I could look at my mom and dad at 18 years old. They decided that they're going to backslide from God. And I look at my life and everything that I was supposed to be. And I woke up Sunday morning, I would go to church. I asked Mom, why aren't you guys ready? And they just looked at me and said, we're not going this Sunday. We don't think we're going to go back to church. And I had to make up my mind at 18 years old that whether my mom and dad ever got back right in God's eyes, that I'm going to go anyways. Yes, it was a hard life to live. Yes, it was hard to do that way by myself. It was hard to make that choice. But I had to stand up and make a value, count the cost of my bean field. Yes, it might have been a little small plot then, but I look how it's increased now. I look at my life and how God has taken everything I have and has multiplied it. I look at how I would have been if I would have stayed in Indiana. I would have possibly still been working in the factory, poisoning myself with the stuff we used to spray our chemicals with. We looked at all that stuff, and I look at how I've traded that for a value of my life. Yes, it has not been easy. Yes, it has been hard to move down here by myself and do what I had to do. But at the same time, I had a father-in-law and a mother-in-law who loved me, and ones I could still look up to as a godly parent on what I should have been. I can look at everything in our lives, and we look at the world and how they have traded their birthright. And they say it's not worth it anymore. It's easier just to be complacent. It's easier just stand here and say it's no longer valuable to go to church. But at the same time, we have almost became the Philistines. We'd rather just step in and take things as a Christian nation, as a Christian in general. We are no longer ones that we say, oh, well, it just happened to be. But the devil want nothing more to our young people, our younger generations, who are middle to our older. They trade us up and say, your birthright is no longer value. Your bean field is no longer of value. Husbands, wives, your family is worth fighting for. It may not seem of value today. It may not say, well, it's hard to stand now by myself. You don't understand what it's like as a single parent. You don't understand what it's like as this or as that. But you know what? You can stand up and say, my bean field is of value today. I don't know why. I don't know who I am preaching to. But I know this, as Shammah was a mighty man of God, you can then pray and know that God can turn you into a mighty woman or a mighty man of God. It doesn't have to be anything of value. It hasn't been anything of particular saying. All it has is an attitude, a made-up mind that I'm going to be a mighty man of God, a mighty woman of God. But yet we stand there, we search for God and things that He wants us to do. And at the same time, all He wants us to do is pray a little more. Seek a little more for God in our lives. We search for the thing. We search for God, and He has a set opinion of us and of you. And we look at things in ourselves. But the biggest problem with the younger generation today is self-esteem. Primarily because of this. We are so faced on Facebook on getting a worldly opinion on what people think of my new haircut, my new smile, my new face without braces. Instead of saying, I have a value of God. I don't have to sit there 5 minutes and say, well, I just checked into McDonald's. I can go to McDonald's too. You want a cookie? But at the same time, our young people have become so faced on what the world can say to us. And what the world says, that we have young people committing suicide because somebody didn't like my picture. But yet at the same time, it doesn't just stem to our younger generation, but to our older generation as well. When the parents are so focused on, oh, well, Facebook is this, and they don't see their child running towards the street. We look at the older generations who they say you don't need to have those things, that we didn't listen. But at the same time, we still said there was an opinion that I have to have outside of church for the world to stand. And I have to say, no matter what, I have to do this. The amount of young people who would rather die than give up their cell phone is staggering. We have young people who are literally admitted into the psych wards because they can't give up their phone. Because they feel ghost twitches and ghost vibrations because they're so used to getting text messages. We have young people and people in this world today at 30 years, 40, 50 years old who, if they don't get a text message a day, they're in depression because they didn't get a text message. Where you see things on Facebook where it says it takes 2.5 seconds to say hi to me. If I'm not worth 2.5 seconds for you to text me hi, I'm not worth your time. Really? How many times have I gone a day without saying hi to one person? Multiple. I am a loner by fact. I don't need to have someone say hi to me because I know where my value comes from. We have traded our birthright. It's not just our church. I'm not talking about our church. I'm talking about the church in general. Don't get me mixed up, and please don't get me confused. We look at the devil as a lion, how lions are seen as predators. But the fact is, lions aren't always predators. Lions like to take over kills. They don't always kill their food. A lot of times they'll go to where a hyena or an alligator or something like that has killed something, and they'll go eat it. Because they don't always want to put forth the effort. They don't always want to put forth that little extra work to get what they have. So when the thing says the devil is a lion seeking who he may devour, he isn't wanting to get someone fresh. He isn't wanting to do the effort. He looks for the weak person who's struggling a little bit along. They may be a little wounded by what the pastor said. A little bit wounded because someone didn't say hi to them in church. Maybe a little wounded because someone didn't hug their neck or shake their hand. And then the devil just latches on. We look at this and people say this doesn't happen, but it happens every single day. We look at nations and we look at the church and how our numbers have dwindled. We look at this thing. You look at David's mighty man Shammah. He wasn't a man who was a farmer. He was a general. He was one of the higher ups in the army. He was a fighter. So he traveled around. But if you read about Shammah and you read a little further into this, it's too much to go into. But around this area where this bean field was Shammah's home. So in other words, he was kind of on leave. He was home. He was visiting mom and dad. And he noticed the Philistines were coming in. But yet, he realized the value of his home. He realized the value of where he was. We realized the value of worth fighting for. We look at everything he said. And he said, I was willing to fight. But he stood in the midst of the ground and defended it and slew the Philistines, and the Lord wrought a great victory. Young people, if you are willing to stand for God, if you're willing to stand a little bit of temptation, a little bit of trial that God's going to throw at you, older generations as well, if we're able to stand a little more, plant our feet, it doesn't matter how long you've been gone from that bean field. You can still go back and defend that bean field now. Yeah, there may be some parts of it taken back, but you know that's a good thing about a military. They take back ground. You're not alone in that bean field. If you feel like you're alone, find someone else and pray with them. Realize you're not alone in the lentil field and know that there's a little more value to you. I'm not saying everybody should feel this way. I'm not saying that most people do. But I know there's somebody out here who may have said, you know, I've been away for a while in this bean field. I may not be so strong in this bean field by myself, but I'm able to stand a little more for it. I'm able to stand a little stronger, stand a little taller, knowing I have a brother or sister by my side that I'm able to stand with and stand against the devil that comes against me with this. It's not always easy. It's not always a gentle thing to do for God. But sometimes it takes a little standing up. It takes a little bit of faith to stand up and say, I'm going to stand tall for that bean field. The bean field isn't everything glorious. It isn't everything great. Sometimes a bean field doesn't look like much. Sometimes the bean fields are brown. They're not always green and luscious. It may look like that bean field's a little dead. But all it takes is a little bit of water so I'll bring that bean field back up. That's the good thing about Indiana. We have hot summers. And there's times we go without water. We go into a drought. And we have burn bans and everything like that. And we have places who catch fire because they didn't sprout enough. They didn't grow because there was no rain. But at the same time, it takes one summer rain to grow a little more. And sometimes that cool summer rain grows everything up. Our bean field may be a little sprouts. It may not look very much. It may barely even germinated a little bit. But it takes one little summer rain from God, and it helps out everything there is. We look in our bean field, and we look in our lives, and how our bean field may be a little dry. It may be a little barren. It may be a little bit brown. But where do we get the rain from? We come to the altar. We pray a little bit. We get a little faith. We get a little trouble. We get a little trial. It comes our way. We come to the altar. We pray about it. We find our secret place at home. For some reason, I have a trouble at home praying. But I have no problems going to my own secret space I know about that I like to pray in. I don't like praying in my house. I like going out to my deer stand and praying. I feel more comfortable in my deer stand praying. My favorite part about hunting is there's nobody else around, and I can pray all I want. Sometimes I miss a deer. It happens. But I get my alone time with God. During the summer, I like being in my deer stand. I like being out in my building. I like being where I can find God. And sometimes it may take a little bit you trying to search where you can find God at. But sometimes you just have to come back to an altar. I've had to stop by here on a Saturday. I've had to stop by here on a Friday night when there wasn't prayer meeting. I've come back throughout the work, even for 5 minutes, and just pray a little bit. It helps. There's nothing wrong with doing that. Honor, if you want to come to the piano. I know it's short, sweet. I usually am. But at the same time, with our lives in God, we look at everything going on in this world today. We look at bills that are trying to be passed, who would literally, if it passes, they can throw us in jail for even thinking we're going to say something against them and how their lifestyle is. We don't have to say it. They just have to feel like we're going to say it. And it's worth prison time. They've tried it once before. It got shot down. They rewrote it, put it right back in. The church is under attack in America. The devil realizes sometimes that the best way to do it is to go by law. We are to obey the law of the land. But sometimes the devil likes to do that to attack our bean fields. I want to encourage us tonight. Come find an altar. Claim that bean field. You can go throughout your entire Christian life, throughout your entire world, and never lay claim to something that you had every right to do it. The Christian people today in America don't realize the power we had. You can see by that. You can see that by the way the devil rolls in our country. If the American people were to take back what's God given to us, and take claim on the bean fields that we have, Rebecca, you don't just have a bean field for you. You have Elijah's. Shelby, AJ, you have the girls and you have Waylon's. If you have a child, you have their bean field in your hands. How you stand up for your bean field directs them. It goes as far as the grandparents. Andrea's grown. I'm her husband now. Her bean field's in my hands, and mine's in hers. We have to be willing to stand together. These past few months has been hard for me. It's been hard for her. I've thrown a lot of attitude towards God on things. I've thrown a lot of questions on why and wanting to know answers. But I didn't always feel right. The last time Brother Gary asked me to preach, I told him, I said, I can't. I have things I got to pray through first. I don't want to be a hypocrite standing up and preaching over something that I can't live myself. That's what I told him last time he asked me to preach. So I couldn't do it. But I've had time to sit down and pray about some things and get things back underneath the blood. And stand up and be able to say, you know what, I'm back in my bean field. I'm going to defend that bean field. It's not always been easy. It's not going to be easy in the future. I know that. But you know what? My bean field is of value. What happens to my mom, what happens to my dad, when my dad never gets back right in God and church, my bean field is still of value without my dad in it. I don't want to see that bean field without my dad in it, but you know what my bean field has to have? It has to have God in my life. We have to have a value in our own lives and know that our bean fields are worth something to this generation. If you would, let's stand. Let's come to the altar. Lay claim to that bean field. If anything else, tell the devil you're going to fight. Because your family's worth fighting for. Your bean fields are worth fighting for. It doesn't matter how old you are to do it. You can be Emma's age and stand, you know what, tell the devil I'm going to fight for my bean field. It doesn't matter how old. It just has to have a willing heart to be able to do it. If you will, let's come, let's pray.